This is On the Sidelines with Box 13.
All right, welcome into another episode of the On the Sidelines podcast. I'm joined, as always, by my partner in crime, DJ Dante Jackson, and maybe the best golfer in all of Seattle sports media, Curtis Crabtree, Fox 13 digital sports reporter. Curtis, thanks for hopping on the pod.
Yeah, no problem. I don't know if I'm the best, but I kind of looked the part today, I guess. So we'll just roll with it.
I had to play into it a little bit.
It's all good.
Right before we started recording this Tuesday morning, we've got some breaking news. It won't be breaking by the time you're listening to the podcast, but Cal Raleigh, the Mariners locking him up reportedly by Jeff Passan for 6 years, $105 million. Sigh of relief for a lot of Mariners fans. Curtis, what's sort of your reaction to the news?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like that's a bargain for the contract that they're getting him on. And ultimately, I think the writing may have been on the wall when Cal Raleigh changed his agents and left Scott Boras. I can't remember who he's with now, but the way Scott Boras wants to handle free agency is have guys play out their contracts and ask for the maximum possible dollar you can get, because he thinks that rising tide for all boats across all of his agents, all of his player agents and stuff. And Cal decided to go a different way. So I think Cal had always been pretty open about the fact that he wanted to stay with the Mariners, and it was about getting a deal done. And now they've gotten to the point where they've locked up a franchise cornerstone for quite a while, which is a very big piece of business done for the Mariners.
Well, and if you're Scott Boras and you want to maximize the value for your client, you're not going to have a guy with the power of Cal Raleigh sign in Seattle, which minimizes power more than any other stadium in baseball. DJ, I'm happy that Cal Raleigh's sticking around.
I mean, very happy. I mean, it's promising to one of the best young catchers in the game, and he decides to sign it. And what Curtis said is a steal, if you ask me. 6 years, $105 million. That's a great deal. It speaks to the commitment of Cal Raleigh, and he's not just paying lip service when he said he wanted to be in Seattle. So with that being said, welcome again, Cal Raleigh, and congratulations on getting paid.
Well, and yeah, I will say, to your point, it does speak a lot to how much Cal likes being in Seattle, because if I'm being honest, the front office is not really doing much to convince these players with their actions and where they're putting their money to stick around. Absolutely,
a couple seasons ago, he spoke out to that fact.
Exactly, and then who knows if he was forced to apologize by the powers that be. But the fact that he's sticking around in 5 years, $105 million, or 6 years, $105 million. Correct me if my math's wrong. $17.5 million a year. Who knows how the money is spread out, but. To your point, Curtis, it's a bargain. I mean, you're getting that offensive firepower from a position where you don't really get a lot of, output for that cheap of dollar.
Yeah, for an organization that is not very willing to spend money on their offensive pieces, like it's a type of deal they need to do to get a good player to stay with them. That's the number that they, I'm sure, would love to have been at for Cal. And I'm absolutely positive he could have got more if he ever did reach the open market.
Absolutely.
So he gets what he wants by staying with the Mariners and putting himself in a position to be one of the guys like Edgar and Ichiro that maybe end up on the wall out in the center field someday. He's obviously got a long way to go in that regard, but they haven't had a guy you could look at and say is absolutely, without question, the best player at a offensive position across baseball in a while. Julio might be. We'll still see. He needs to get there. But Cal, you can definitely make the case he's the best catcher in baseball, both offensively and defensively. Platinum Glove Award winner last year, and to get him locked up is a very big deal for them.
I would definitely say he's one of the best catchers. But this plays into the Mariners' strengths. I mean, you talk about their pitching staff all the time, and Cal is vital to that staff.
That's a great point.
All those pitchers talk about how comforting he is when he's behind the plate. They all want him to catch them. So this plays to the Mariners' strengths, and signing him is a good get. I mean, this is a great signing.
Well, and the rapport with the pitchers, but also just defensively, throwing runners out, framing. He's perfect in spring training challenges so far this year. So that's a bonus for this new system if they implement it into the bigs. Another thing, a lot of people talk about the Mariners farm system not being able to develop position players. We know what they can do with the pitching staff, but now you've got the two position players the Mariners have been able to take up through their system, develop, become solid elite big leaguers in Julio Rodriguez and Cal Raleigh, and they've been able to get deals with both of them. It'll be interesting to see with Logan Gilbert, with George Kirby, with Brian Wu and Bryce Miller are further away, but Logan and George sort of getting there, that's some big money that John Stanton is going to have to give out. Curtis, do you see the Mariners being able to retain all of those pieces?
So the devil's advocate side for the Mariners not spending money this offseason would be if they then go and put a lot of those dollars into the guys that are a part of this roster for long-term on bigger contracts. If they do that, then you can at least say, well, at least they did keep the guys that they should have paid here in the long term when their deals come up. We aren't going to know that for a while. And if they don't, then you can even put more of a hyper focus on this year and the fact that they didn't add an impact bat if they don't get where they want to go this season, and say that was an absolute failure like we thought it could be if it goes down that road. But we've still got another full season to play, a couple more before some of these pitchers reach that free agency point to figure out exactly where that lands. But giving them some benefit of the doubt, whether they deserve it or not, if they do at least spend the money down the line to keep these guys, and that's part of the thinking of not spending it now, I can at least understand where that comes from, even if I don't, given as good as they are with the pitching staff, don't get them not just trying to chase it right now in the short term.
And my thing is they did it early.
Mm-hmm.
They signed Cal early. They didn't wait until the 12th hour or the last minute to try to get it in. Now, we've been wanting him signed for the last few years. He's been a great Mariner. So to handle this and handle it early and get him at that bargain basement price, it's a win for the Mariners. One of the best moves I can recount in recent Mariner history as far as signing. The quality of player, the quality of contract as far as being team friendly, and 6 years with him handling this pitching staff that should take us as far as you want to go. I think it's just a win-win for everybody.
Well, let's talk about how far the Mariners can go. Opening day is on Thursday. We're just over 48 hours away from the first pitch of the 2025 season. It feels crazy to say. We've got some sun in Seattle. Spring is budding. I would love to get your guys' takes on the floor ceiling, but then also the expectation of this team, what you see coming into 2025. Curtis, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think the floor for the team, because of how good the pitching staff is like that. The floor is like 78 wins, because they're just not going to be bad given the strength of their pitching staff across the roster, bullpen included. They've the fact that Matt Brash will be back probably within a month, Gregory Santos likely healthy for the whole season, Andres Munoz at the back end, reshaped middle inning guys that I think seem to fit pretty well. Then you've got the starters, which we've talked about, have been very, very good. The floor is high. Whether the ceiling's high or not it's going to come down to what the offense does. Some of that's going to be whether their own guys hit. Does Jorge Polanco have a bounce back year? Does Rowdy Tellez, who's now officially a part of the roster too after signing with the team earlier today? That was the big news until Cal Raleigh decided to sign. Does Mitch Garver have a bounce back year as well? If Julio really takes off to another level with a change in approach, that's where the primary offensive push from this team is going to have to come from, because they didn't go get it on the outside. And if that happens, then they maybe can pursue somebody at the deadline to add to the mix and try to push the offensive forward. Ceiling's probably, without adding a bat, is still probably 91 wins, something like that. But that, given the fact that the division is probably the weakest it's been in a few years, barring Texas really kind of recovering and rebounding after their down year, it's a gettable division, so that should have them in the mix as long as they're able to do that. And it's been a good week for the Mariners. The Raleigh deal, deciding, at least committing to moving on from Mitch Haniger so you can put Rowdy Tellez on the roster, the streaming app availability. It is a very good week for the Mariners leading into opening day, and I think you have to give them credit for that.
It's a great week, but it's too many ifs.
Yeah.
It's too many ifs.
A lot of ifs.
However, I will agree, because 80 was my number as far as floor, 90 being the ceiling. So, they're right in the 80-90 win category, I would say. This team wasn't far off the last few years. People forget that. They were 1-2 games out of the playoffs. And from what all accounts tell me, this team is made for the playoffs. So with the pitching staff, you don't want to see the Mariners come to tournament time. So All they got to do is get in. 1 or 2 more wins. Do we need those bats? Yes, we do. But if they all play to the back of their baseball card, and you got Randy Rosarina for a whole year this time, you got Victor Robles, who I think is the X factor for a whole year and being counted on, I think this Mariners team is poised for a playoff run. And once they get in, who knows what can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to point out, and it sort of gets overshadowed by the lack of activity this offseason, but they were active at the trade deadline. I would have liked to see them bring back Justin Turner, but you get Randy Arozarena, one of the better bats that was available. So, when I'm looking at, I'm sort of similar to you guys with where the floor is at. I can't see this team finishing under 500 unless something catastrophic happens with the pitching staff and injuries.
Yeah. Or Cal.
Absolutely. Or Cal. I mean, you lock him up because he's so important, but if he goes down, I mean, there's not a lot of depth at that position in general, just in baseball. The ceiling, I will say I'm a little bit more optimistic than you guys. I think this team can win 95 games. If Julio's playing at an MVP caliber, he's going to win an MVP at some point in his career. If that's this year, if Randy Arozarena is, sort of the Curtis, you would know he was World Series MVP, right? Or All-Star Game MVP with the Rays when they went to the.
I know. I just remember he had a really good playoffs. I don't remember if it was an award-winning thing, but he was.
He has that in him. He was starting in the All-Star Game just a few years back. So
here.
Exactly.
All-Star Game here.
Yep. So that's a guy where you can get more out of. I like Jorge Polanco to have a bounce-back season. He's been swinging the bat well in spring. So I've got a lot of optimism heading into this season.
I agree.
Now the one thing, and I'll start with you, Curtis, on this is the spring training numbers. The Mariners are coming in, swinging the bats well. I will say I think everyone's in agreement that spring training stats do not matter whatsoever. But
I don't agree.
Okay.
I don't agree.
We'll get into that. But does at least the can you carry some offensive momentum, some of that confidence into the regular season, where offensively they've started slow a lot of the time due to the climate here in Seattle?
Well, you'd rather feel good than otherwise, but
right.
I don't think the stats matter, because how many of those guys that you're getting the hits off of are even going to be major league pitchers when spring training starts? Like, I think it's like preseason football, third string versus third string. Like, yeah, congrats, you put up 100 yards against the Browns' third string defense. Who cares? So like you have to take it with a grain of salt. But if they're in a groove, they're swinging the bat well, they're seeing the ball well, all of that is a good thing. And some of those numbers certainly will play out and reflect decently when they come around to start the season. So you would definitely want to have them feeling good as opposed to the opposite end of the spectrum for sure. But I can't tell you how many times on the plus side and the minus side where guys have come in crap spring training, good spring training, and done the exact opposite as soon as games started to count for real. So.
Well, in one example, Jorge Polanco had an amazing spring last year, and then we know what he did in the regular season. But DJ, what do you make of the Mariners' offense being hot?
I agree with Curtis. I think it's better to feel good than not.
Yeah.
If you're swinging the bat well in spring training, hopefully you can carry that over. We understand the stats aren't what they are going to be in the regular season, but I'd rather feel good. I'd rather be swinging those bats and having that momentum than not. It doesn't mean nothing to me, that spring training. If it didn't, they wouldn't take records and they wouldn't even play. They just practice. Mm-hmm. So it has to mean something. And if they swing in the bats well, I think you carry that over, hopefully, to the regular season.
Well, and one site that has been very good to see, Julio Rodriguez driving the ball the other way, not trying to pull everything. That grand slam he had the other day, battling in his at bat, and then taking a fastball on the outer edge to right center field. And crazy, it still goes out of the ballpark because he has that power. He doesn't have to be pulling the ball every time. What do you guys? So there's some new philosophies coming into the season with the Dan Wilson regime and him getting a supposedly a full season. Right. More than just the 6 weeks that he had last year. He brought in Edgar. There was more of a focus on using the whole field, hitting the ball where it's pitched. Do you guys buy it? Do you guys buy that this philosophy is what the Mariners offense needs to turn things around, that we're not going to see the same Mariners offense that we had last year, even though it's mostly the same cast of characters?
I coach my daughter in softball.
Yeah.
And I tell her, keep it simple. See the ball, hit the ball. It's that simple, I guess. But I agree with the simplified approach. I mean, just don't try to do too much. Just put the bat to the ball, and more times than not, you're going to be successful. So I agree with the new approach, and I'm curious. I'm actually excited to see what Dan Wilson does to this team. Everybody seems to think that Scott Service was more of a Dipoto guy and more in line with the front office. And Dan Wilson is kind of a breath of fresh air because he's one of the guys. He is Mr. Mariner. He was a Mariner. He was a player. He was down there not too long ago, and he was around the organization. Some of the players got to know him before he was a manager, so that personal touch is there. And I'm curious to see what Dan Wilson does with this team. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Curtis, do you buy the new offensive philosophy, and do you think it's going to help coming into this year?
I think it's going to help some guys specifically.
Yes.
Like who?
It's not even necessarily a specific who. It's the player that struggles with the information overload that they were given. And I don't know who those guys were because I can't get in their heads. But I do know that there was some guys who, with their approach, what it had been before was it was very analytics oriented of saying this pitcher throws to this part of the zone, hunt your pitch in here, certain, aspects of it. And some guys love that. Mitch Haniger wants all the data he can get, and we'll deal with that. Other guys, I think they look at it and be like, I didn't take calculus for a reason. Like, why? What are we doing here? And so sometimes it is like, and at the end of the day, like if you're getting to a point where you're not just being athletic and doing what you've done to get there, it can throw you off. And it's one reason why like elite players in any sport may not always make the best coaches because, they can be like, well, what worked for me, well, this guy doesn't have your talent, so he's going to have to do it a different way. He might need those numbers and have to go find the margins to get there. But a guy like Julio and his talent, baseball's already a game where you're so much in your head, game to game, at bat to at bat, pitch to pitch, that throwing that much more things to think about can be a little bit problematic at times. And I think that's where it will help some players. And I'm sure they will have the information available to the players that do want to seek it out more. But I think that's the primary difference between how they're going to approach their hitting philosophy, because at least giving them credit, I guess, again, they saw that the way they have approached this whole process of the last several years was not working, and they did need to revisit it and change what they were doing, and they at least did it. Whether it works or not, we'll find out. That's why they play the games, but they're at least making a change to get to where they are now.
I think it's interesting. You mentioned that they saw that it wasn't working and they made a change. If they saw that it wasn't working, for how many years? I mean, how are we only here now? That's my question, and that's sort of my problem.
So you feel they waited too long?
Absolutely. And at the time, I was not a guy that wanted to see Scott Service fired because I didn't really see what big of a difference it made. I thought Scott Service and his bullpen decisions were sound, and generally I didn't really have a problem with his philosophy. But if it's this information overload, how can we not make that adjustment and just go back to letting these guys be baseball players?
Well, that also comes from the front office. This was an organizational plan. Mm-hmm. This wasn't a Scott Service. This is necessarily
and
how we're
all the way
things.
Up top to Jerry Dipoto.
Yes.
I mean, you're leading the league in strikeouts, and you're about to go set a record in strikeouts in a season, and that's what it takes to make a change. Not just being mediocre offensively and for years having a strikeout problem and not being able to get the players that fit what you're trying to do. Maybe you're the problem.
Well, if you have a belief system and believe it's why you've gotten to the job where you're at, and you feel very strongly about this is what works, this is why I believe this works, we're going to keep working it. And particularly coming out of a rebuild, we don't have the offensive pieces in place to do the things we want to do yet, so we're going to make tweaks to the roster here and there. Eventually got to the point where, okay, this isn't working, now we're going to have to reevaluate. And it happens all, different areas all the time. The Seahawks have had to do it a number of different times with certain paths that they've gone down to. Okay, this doesn't work. We need to pull back and do things different too. So it's you live, you learn, you kind of try to find a way to move on.
Yep. And it's an organizational thing. It's not hard it's not easy to turn that bus around. Are you talking about minor league system on up? I mean, it's a lot that goes into these organizational decisions. So to change your philosophy and pivot, it's not an automatic thing. It's not a year-long thing. I assume it takes a little bit more time to turn it. Like this year is just the start of their new philosophy. I mean, so I don't think they'll have the success that they might have in later years. But I like the direction they're going. I like to keep it simple, and I think the Mariners are going to surprise a lot of people this year. Playoffs, definitely, and once you're in, Who knows?
And this is an organizational philosophy that isn't just at the major league level. It's something that's in the minor leagues too. It's something they bring guys along with. And so, some guys are going to develop with it and be comfortable with it, and others are just not. So it's not just purely a make the change at the major league level and everything's all good. So they're going to have to find the right way to push forward here organizationally across the board.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how the philosophy plays out and how it's apparent on the field starting on Thursday. The other philosophy that I was interested in, Dan Wilson was talking to Aaron Levine one-on-one when we were down in Peoria for spring training. We heard Scott Service say a lot early, and it's just early, when they have a tough loss or whatever. Here's what Dan had to say on what he took from his manager back in the day, Lou Piniella.
One of the things I've taken from Lou really is, just the idea of the importance of today's game. In some ways, you do have to look forward, you have to plan, you have to do this and that. But at the end of the day, it's about winning, and it's about winning tonight. That's the only game you have control over. And I know it sounds cliche, but seeing him think that over and over and how he managed that as well, I feel like is something that we try to bring to these guys.
So it's about winning. It's about winning tonight for Dan. We're not playing there is aspects of we're playing it's a marathon, not a sprint aspect. It's baseball, right? But there's still the emphasis on winning tonight. Curtis, what do you think of, would you call it a shift from Scott Service in that regard? I can't really recall him saying that directly.
I don't know if it's a shift. I mean, it's all a good philosophy to say you want to win every game every night, but then let's point to when you got to scratch a starter 20 minutes before game time and you're throwing your long reliever out there to start the game. Well, now it's about managing your bullpen so you don't lose the entire series because your pitching is wrecked. So it's nice. Everybody wants to think you're trying to win every game in baseball. It's about winning the most games over 162.
That's a good point.
And that's what a manager's supposed to do. At the end of the day, yes, the bullpen decisions. So much of that nowadays comes down to being mapped out before they even throw the first pitch of the game. Mm-hmm. Trying to target certain pockets of an opposing lineup. Okay, we know we're going to throw Munoz against our 2-3-4. If we get beyond the 7th inning, that's who he's going to go face. That's all kind of taken care of before they even run out of the dugout. It's about trying to maximize those wins by not making sure your roster is in its best position every day to be competitive. That might mean you punt on it and throw a position player out to pitch the 9th inning in a lost game so that you're saving a bullpen arm for the next. That's how you have to manage these. So, I mean, Scott Service certainly knew that too. I don't know that it's all that different. And, I know they came into spring training last year saying, we're going to try to come out of the gates hotter because that's been a struggle in the past. Didn't necessarily happen. Mm-hmm. It's all good to have philosophies until you're in the heat of things and all that. It's a good light to guide with, but I don't know that it's too much different, honestly.
I think it's different, definitely, because when you speak it into the ether, when you put it out there, it kind of puts the team on notice. It sets a mindset and an attitude. Hey, we're trying to win tonight. Now, my problem with Scott Service was after every loss, we got tomorrow. We have tomorrow. No, I don't want to hear that. I want to be upset about losing tonight. Mm-hmm. And then I want to try to win the next game tomorrow. I don't want to keep kicking the can down the road. And I feel like some manager, Scott Service, was too cool for school. He never got, and if Dan Wilson comes from the school of Lou Piniella, I like that because Lou Piniella was fiery. Historically, we know what Lou Piniella was about. So if Dan Wilson can just have a little bit of that and make sure that, he sets his team on fire and he sets that standard, I'm with that. So I agree. The messaging, to speak it out loud, it sets a mindset, it sets a tone. And that's what Dan Wilson is doing, and I'm excited about it.
Absolutely. I sort of, there's got to be a balance, right? Because, to your point, Curtis, you can't just go out there and throw Logan Gilbert 7 or 8 innings, 120 pitches every single time. He's not going to last a whole 162-game season. But also having that attitude of, hey, guys, it is important that we win this game tonight. I don't care that it's game 15. I don't care if it's game 115. This game tonight matters. And, Aaron made the point down in spring training, if they win one more game in April, they're in the playoffs last year. Yeah. Or if they, 2 years ago, they're in the playoffs. If they win 2 more games in April, that got away from them. So it's going to be interesting to see how all this plays out. Mariners season's right around the corner, guys. It's going to be fun. But let's shift gears to
one more quick note.
Yeah.
Apparently a full no trade clause for Cal Raleigh.
Wow.
In the deal too, so.
Nice.
Wow.
I like it.
Well, that sort of makes sense with the more team-friendly salary. Maybe
That's per
you
Ken
give up some money to get some.
That's per Ken Rosenthal of the
Interesting.
Athletics. So if Cal gets to be wherever he wants to be now, if he wants to move, it's going to go to where he's going to move down the line, and he gets to say, I'm staying in Seattle. So.
Well, and he's earned that, absolutely, with his play on the field and his leadership as well in that locker room. Let's shift gears to the Seahawks, who continue to make headlines. DK Metcalf, after his exit, going on the Get Got podcast with Mike Robinson and Marshawn Lynch, a couple of former Seahawks. Talking about everything. He didn't air it all out, but he aired some of it out. D-Jack, what was your reaction to some of what DK had to say?
It was kind of like a hodgepodge. I didn't know really what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
He was kind of all over the place. It seemed like he was looking for something to say about the Seahawks. At the end of the day, they didn't pay you the price that you thought you were worth. I thought you were worth it also, but they didn't pay that price and you moved on. He said something like, that Grubb, they didn't basically respect him and they didn't make him part of the game plan, and he tried to contribute. He didn't like Tyler Lockett being phased out of the offense also. These are things I don't think DK should be worried about. You should have been worried about catching that football, which he didn't do at a great rate last year, if you ask me. He dropped some passes for sure, and he's known for that. So I don't really know what the message of what he was trying to say, but I'm confused, definitely. I'm just confused. I don't know what to say about it.
Curtis, did you have any takeaways from what DK had to say?
I did think the comments about Grubb from the San Francisco game were interesting, just purely from we stopped sharing our own observations with the guy, because I think that was one of a number of issues that the organization had with the offensive coordinator and offensive coaching period last year, which is why they're no longer here.
Right.
But as far as I've been told, the DK situation was fine by mid-season, and then by the end of the year, it turned to where he decided he wanted to go elsewhere, and it came to the formal trade request. That's where the part about the Tyler part seems a little bit off to me, because that came out the day that they tried to honor Tyler on the way out the door, which Tyler, I think, firmly knew about. Go listen to any press conference he had from December. Tyler knew what was coming. Mm-hmm. Well, he knew he was leaving this team at the end of the year, and then for DK's side to leak his trade request on the same day they're trying to honor Tyler on the way out the door, that rings a little hollow to me.
Well, and he talks about loyalty in the podcast. I've got a lot of loyalty to Tyler Lockett. It was hard to see him getting exiled in a way and it sort of seemed like he didn't see it coming. We've got a clip for you from the podcast. Take a listen.
We felt it throughout the whole season. So Locke been there since 2019, since my rookie year, and since 2019 it was me, him, Geno, and Jay Reed. Those were the only four. Well, and Mike Dixon and J-Mon. But we were the only 6 people left from that 2019 team. The team that beat the 49ers, or the team that felt actually that real camaraderie in the building. Yeah. And now when you start switching out OCs and switching out head coaches, you start getting different messages from what you're used to. We didn't go in there screaming, always compete anymore, or, the Pete messages were gone.
Completely gone.
So now it's just 6 outsiders.
So the messaging's different. The DK says it's just 6 outsiders left from the Pete regime in that 2019 season when he got here. But did they give Mike's messaging a chance? It just seems like, the messaging is different. It's not what I'm used to, so I'm not going to be receptive to it. I feel like it has to go both ways, right?
Welcome to a coaching change.
Yes.
That's the NFL. How are we naive to how the NFL works? I understand Pete was here for a long time, but it wasn't working with him here. I feel like the team needed a change, a new direction, and the Tyler Lockett stuff, him seeming surprised that, they were going to move on from Tyler Lockett. It's like, I could have told you, when Tyler's contract was restructured last offseason, that this was probably it for him.
Yes.
They weren't going to carry him at this price tag, especially with them drafting JSN in the first round and him having another year under his belt. It just doesn't make sense to me. How can you be so naive and then try to turn it around and act like it's like the Seahawks' fault for operating as a football franchise trying to win football games to this year and in the future.
Yeah, I mean, if you know how the salary cap works and what guys' contracts are, so it's pretty easy to figure out who's going to be on the chopping block.
It's not a secret. It's not a secret.
I can look to next year's contract and say that they could save $11.5 million cutting Geno Nwosu after this year. That's probably going to happen. Like, unless he has a really good year, then you sign an extension and go a different way. But that's the Tyler Lockett move was telegraphed from before last season ever began. It shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone.
And speaking of Nwosu, John Schneider just let out that he had another surgery, so he might not even be ready for the start of this upcoming season. So that was very interesting for him to divulge. I think DK was just looking for reasons, and that's what it seemed like on this podcast. I mean, you laid back, you with Marshawn Lynch, you with Michael Robb, two former Seahawks, and they kind of outgoing. So he was looking, to find a reason of why he left the Hawks. The Tyler Lockett thing, like Curtis said, I mean, it was coming down a yellow brick road for the last 2 or 3 years. You could see it coming. So, what are you upset about? We needed DK to produce at a Pro Bowl level last year, and he didn't do that. And that's what I always say. You got to worry about yourself, DK. If you produce, if you're a Pro Bowler, if you're an all NFL wide receiver, then you can talk. But until then, you got to do your job. And he didn't do his job. So let's just be honest on that.
Well, and it's just he talks about loyalty to Tyler Lockett, and the Seahawks try to do things the right way as an organization. Curtis, you've told me about how they operate, and they try to give Tyler his due. They're not cutting him in cold blood. They understand what he's meant to the franchise. They try to make this entire day about him, and then DK goes and requests the trade 20 minutes later. So it's like you've got the loyalty. You're mad at how the Seahawks are doing business, and then you crap all over how they're trying to operate the right way and treat their veterans with respect.
And they were intentional about when they were releasing Tyler Lockett. They had released 4 other players
the day before.
Yep. So they made him. They gave him his own day, and here comes DK stomping all on it. Then you want to get on a podcast and talk about this, how the Seahawks disrespect
loyalty,
him.
and that's my brother.
So it makes no sense.
One thing I will say there, I think the trade request came before Tyler Lockett was, the fact that it became public came after Tyler was released. I think John had heard for a while that DK was looking for a change and wanting to go elsewhere. I don't think it caught him by surprise on the Wednesday they cut Tyler Lockett that was a thing. I think he was very well aware of it, but the fact that it then became public on that day, that's the part I think the Seahawks in particular are pretty frustrated with.
So the DK news is somehow a very small piece of this entire Seahawks offseason. Curtis, I'm curious to get your take. What do you think of the direction the Seahawks are moving in through their offseason moves and how John is constructing this roster?
Yeah, so I remember I was on the Washington Sports Wrap show the night that the Geno trade happened that Friday night, and I remember saying at the time that I was curious about the order of operations here. Right. If the fact that DK had because we didn't know everything then, and I've learned a lot more since, didn't know about when the DK trade request came. So was it, okay, now we're going to look to move Geno too, because if DK's here, it's not worth keeping Geno, and that's why we're doing. Both those moves were independent of each other, and both I think came down to essentially contracts situations. And I heard that the ask from Geno's side was large. I'm not going to say specifically how large because I would need to get that confirmed a little bit more heavily, but it was sizable, and to a point where, as John Schneider said to us after the trade deadline, like, there was no negotiations because it wasn't going to get done. They put, from what I've been told, they put out an offer of 2 years, $90 million on an extension for Geno. Now, depending on which side of the contract you're on, you're going to divvy up how that contract number looks a little bit differently. It probably wasn't going to average $40 million over the course of the 3 years, and he likely isn't seeing the last year of that contract deal, I would assume. But they got ghosted when that offer was put on the table. They did not get a word back from Geno's side when that contract was presented. And like I said, the ask from Geno's side, from what I understand, was significantly more than that. So where at that point they're like, okay, well then we're going to go a different direction here. And that's where they got to the Geno side of that decision. So once those decisions were made, I think they had a pretty good bead that they could get Sam Darnold at that point. I did that during the season too when they played here in Minnesota. First tweet of the game: Sam Bradford completes. No, that's wrong too. Sam Darnold, I think, because the number of guys have connection to him either from USC or otherwise, I think they felt like they were in a pretty good position to do that and had to move quick and did it and got another quarterback in here that they feel pretty good about for a cheaper rate than they would have had Geno Smith under. I don't think Geno was super keen on staying here in general either. So I had one person tell me that they think that Geno would sign a contract for less elsewhere than he would have here.
Wow. So. The anti-hometown discount.
Exactly.
Wow.
So what would you attribute that to? Mike McDonald, or is it the price?
I think he was a little bit put off by the fact that when he wanted to discuss his contract situation before last season, the Seahawks said no. They basically will not broach the idea of a contract extension with 1 year left on before there's 1 year left on a contract. It's the same reason they didn't give Cam Chancellor an extension back in 2015. It's the way they do business, and they feel very confident about that. That's the way they want to run things, and so they wouldn't approach it. And I think that left us some sour feelings and got to the point where Geno was looking to get his and preferably elsewhere.
Let's talk about the asking price though of Geno. Is that why is silence right now with the Raiders? I'm kind of curious as to why he hasn't signed with the Raiders. Yeah. It seems like he has all the leverage. He can name his price. Why isn't he signed yet?
I think that's a pretty good read of the situation there, Dante. I think he is looking for a contract that Pete and the Raiders may not have quite necessarily knew.
But don't you discuss this before you trade for the player?
You would think so.
It's the Raiders.
Think of Pete. I mean, Pete is an absolute eternal optimist. Like I'm sure he looked. I've got a relationship with this guy. We'll make it work. I'm sure that they feel that they could get things across the finish line, and they very well might. But at least right now, it certainly was not done up and ready to go when the trade came.
Well, it was definitely a red flag when they made the trade, and then it was reported that there wasn't a contract in place, even though it was expected to get done. I mean, that's a red flag when you make a deal like that. And Curtis, if that contract offer, 2 years, $90 million, $45 million a year, divvy it up, however people make it seem, that's a respectable offer. To get ghosted off of that, it's pretty clear that Geno just didn't want to be here.
That's why there was no negotiation.
Yeah.
They never heard back on the contract offer. And I think they had gone into the offseason fully expecting to do a contract extension with Geno and keep him here for at least a couple more years. And when the circumstances played out the way it did, they had to go another direction.
Well, and to put that number sort of into the equation of how we've been analyzing the whole situation, I love Geno Smith, and I was a Geno Smith defender, through this season, but that's not a number that if it, whatever it was, that's not more than $45 million is not what I'm comfortable paying Geno Smith. Curtis, how do you analyze, or do you agree with the Seahawks moving on from Geno, pivoting the way that they did?
From what I know, yeah. I think it's perfectly logical. Now, whether Sam Darnold makes it work or not, we'll find out on that side of things. But the decision itself, purely to go a different direction, yeah, I think it makes complete sense. Yeah. And I think Geno is a very good quarterback in his own right too. There's too much variance in his play to say that he's consistently at the level I think he was asking for. I think he doesn't get enough credit for what he did here. I think there's 4 guys that are basically the top of the tier, and then everybody from 5 to 20 is essentially the same, where if you put them in the right circumstance, they can win a Super Bowl. And I think Geno's absolutely one of those guys, but you need a little bit of help, and you can even sub-tier that a little bit if you want to. But I think he's firmly in the somewhere between, he can play to a 5 to 18 range on any given week. Plenty good enough. The margin of error is not there to be super consistent with it all the way out throughout, but he's a very talented quarterback. He's got all the talent, all the tools you want to have out of a quarterback. You just don't know if you get it consistently enough, and he's 34 years old. That's the other side of it. If he was 27, the ask might have been more reasonable.
I want to talk about that. Let's dispel that rumor. I mean, not the rumor, but the fact that he's 34 years old. But what is he in football years? Geno sat on the bench for a good 10 years. Mm-hmm. He's just started playing. I don't see age being a factor for Geno. he's definitely a better quarterback than Darnold, I must say, and it's not even close.
More proven at the very least.
Now, if everybody else gets the excuse of the offensive line, we all agree the Seahawks need the offensive line. Geno played behind that offensive line, and not only did he play behind that offensive line, he had 2 offensive coordinators in 3 years. So Geno was dealing with some issues too. And he still was a top 15 quarterback. I put him in between 10 and 15 as a quarterback, and that's a good quarterback right there. I think you could have won with Geno, definitely, and I definitely think the Seahawks took a step back with Sam Darnold. It's not even close to me.
To me, he's like 8 to 12. For me personally, I think he's in the 8 to 12 range.
Yeah.
He's a very, very good quarterback, and he did absolutely mitigate a lot of their offensive line issues over the last couple seasons. You give him full-on credit for that. The fact he hasn't played as much throughout his career probably does mean there's a little less wear on him as well. But it might mean if he does have that one injury, he doesn't bounce back from it. Yeah. So, the age still factors in. So it's a part of the equation.
You're right. You're right.
I will say, you mentioned the offensive line. There was a lot of, this makes sense if they handle the offensive line because of Sam Darnold's issues with pressure in his year with Minnesota. They haven't done anything with the offensive line. We've been talking about it ad nauseum for the past 2 weeks.
Right.
Curtis, what's your insight into what the Seahawks are doing with the offensive line, what their plan is?
Yeah, there are a few different situations. So they were interested in Will Fries, and they wanted to bring him in for a physical because I think he broke his tibia in 2 places last year, or not tibia in 2 places last year. So they wanted to see that, and Minnesota was willing to give him a contract without seeing a physical. And then I believe the contract that he got was even that shocked them too, that he was able to get that amount of a contract. I think it's, speaking of Cal Raleigh's number, I think it's exactly the same. I think it's $17.5 million a year for Fries coming off a major injury like that. They wanted to see him and first before putting a contract offer out there, but they were certainly interested in him. It went a different way. The 3 guys that they've had in over the last week, they've had medical concerns about each of them as well. Lucas Patrick, Tevin Jenkins, and Dylan Radins. There's medical concerns on all 3 of them. With Tevin Jenkins, there was an additional concern. I think they were a little bit I think they were worried about his commitment, I'll say, to the game in that regard. I think that was one thing that put them off a little bit and why they wanted to bring him in and talk to him. And I think they still have faith in the guys that they've drafted. I think they've been, from what I've been, they have a very poor opinion of what the offensive coaching was last year. Now, that's, coming from them, that could be their spin on why the offensive line has struggled and all of that. But if that's what they believe, they feel like the new offensive staff, the new offensive line coaching will help get more out of the guys that they have already under the umbrella. And if they think that Sautoa Laumea and Christian Haynes are not significantly different players than Dylan Radins and Lucas Patrick at 32 years old, why would you go spend a premium on those guys to bring them in here for even the 1 year? They did that with, not a premium per se, but they did that deal with Laken Tomlinson last year. He wasn't good enough. Why would you go spend that money? Why would you spend $17.5 million on Will Fries when he's got, in some years I think would be considered a B-tier free agent, was one of the best available because he's coming off the injury. I can understand why they've gone the way that they have on that front. But in order for it to work, just like we in some of the other discussions, it's fine to make the moves you have, but now if that's the path you're going to go, you have to make it work with the guys you have, and we'll see if they're able to do that.
But which one is it? I mean, do I play the young guys and I believe what I have on the roster is good enough, or do I look for the free agents that have injury history? If we're talking about that, you signed a Cooper Kupp and a Demarcus Lawrence, 2 of your biggest acquisitions, and they both have injury history. So what are we talking about here? They're not going by what they say. I don't understand that. Like, if you're not signing players, offensive linemen especially, when we all agree that's what you need, and you cite injury history as the reason for not signing them, but then your 2 biggest acquisitions in Cooper Kupp and DeMarcus Lawrence are veterans on the back end of their career with injury history, what sense does it make?
It's the level of player compared to those guys. the gap between the Lucas Patricks and Dylan Radens's and replacement level offensive linemen, I don't think is that significant a gap, where guys like DeMarcus Lawrence has been one of the best run-stopping defensive ends, at the very least, in the NFL for the last several seasons. Cooper Kupp has been a, obviously, Triple Crown winning wide receiver a couple years ago. Yes, there's the injury concerns in there. There's a reason all of these guys are free agents, is because the team that they want is letting them go for some reason or another. So you have to pick your spots where you can, and it's about finding the value of a specific spot. And I think that's where one of the reasons why offensive linemen are in need across the NFL in general. That's why guys that maybe don't deserve it are getting bigger contracts than they should, because they are the guys who become available and teams need them. So there is like a demand for them, but you have to figure out, like, think of the Luke Joeckel deal back in the deal. They go 1 year, $8 million with a guy in Luke Joeckel who also couldn't stay healthy.
Yes.
Speaking about changing philosophies,
which
right?
begs the point: have they not learned their lesson?
So in this regard, I would be saying yes, they have, right? Because we've done the Luke Joeckel deal. That didn't work out. We signed Laken Tomlinson. He was at least healthy, but he didn't give us the level of play we need. Maybe we don't play in that sandbox at the moment because it hasn't benefited us.
But we go and sign Lawrence and Kupp.
Yeah, because they have a better track record and they're in a more their position. The value you can get them at compared to their position and the injury histories, I think, is better for those spots.
Well, let me ask you this. Where does that leave Boye Mafe and Derek Hall, now that you have acquired DeMarcus Lawrence? Where does that leave those two players? Well, Boye Mafe, he's expecting a contract. That he'll be available for a contract at least next year.
Yeah, in their scheme, he's more of they're more linebackers, the outside linebacker, pass rusher type. So I think Lawrence is more of that, like, 5-tech defensive end spot. So they might split some of the reps in time, but I think those positions are a little bit fundamentally different in what they want to do.
Well, so with the offensive line, we've we'll end here. We're sort of running up to the time. I wanted to talk about March Madness. I don't think we have time.
The games here were good. There, we talked about it.
The offensive line.
Terps.
We've talked about John Schneider sort of losing the benefit of the doubt a little bit with his ability to, build a competent offensive line. You look at this offseason, and it's like, to make sense of it from the outside looking in, you have to give the benefit of the doubt that John Schneider knows what he's doing and that his evaluation of the talent that he has is correct and that he can actually get more out of them than he would be able to get in the free agent market, also for cheaper. Does John still deserve the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the offensive line, given the lack of success over the better part of a decade?
That's the job, right? You're not going to hit on everything, and he certainly has not, and I'm pretty sure he would cop to that at times too. And it is the one area on the roster that has been subpar pretty consistently for a while now. And they have to find it, like we said, philosophically, I think their plan this offseason makes sense to me, just like on the Geno and DK discussion. You can tell me all of these decisions in a vacuum on their own. Makes sense. We're not, going to go there with this guy because they're medical. We're not going to go with this guy because of this or this and this. But then what the path you do choose, you still need to make work.
Right.
So that's going to be the next step in seeing what they do. And the offseason is not over. They can still go out and find somebody that they do think fits to come in and at least give them some veteran depth in that regard. The draft is considered to be, I think, fairly decent with offensive linemen, so they can backstop with another guy up there. I know they're pretty high on Satoa Lomea about making a step forward. And they took Christian Haynes in the 3rd round last year. I'm sure he'll get another opportunity. I heard that his confidence got pretty shot last year, given the way that they handled things. And
I'll ask you right now then, because we talked about this last week with Alyssa. Christian Haynes being a healthy scratch half the year, your 3rd round pick couldn't even make the active roster on game day half the year. Mm-hmm. What do you make of him? Because that the actions speak louder than words with their opinions of him, no matter how much they speak his praises off the field.
And Lamea playing ahead of him.
Ahead of Christian Haynes. What do you make of those two?
It might be the fact that maybe he's better on the left side, and Laken Tomlinson had that spot all year. Maybe that was one reason why. And now that Laken's not here, that's the spot you can put him. It may just been the way the coaches wanted, the specific coaches that they had here last year, and Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff wanted to have their offensive line play, that it didn't seem to be a fit. Maybe with the way that Clint Kubiak's scheme comes in here and fits, and the coaching that they're going to get out of John Bolton this year, that's going to fit the guys that they have here a little bit better. All of that kind of goes into, I think, the philosophy they have of going about it the way that they have this offseason. But just like the Mariners hitting, at the end of the day, the path that they choose has to still work.
Yep.
And so that's where we'll see when it's all said and done how much better that group is. If their belief in those guys is well-founded or not, it's all going to play out.
And I think the path is the wrong path, definitely, because you continue to try to find deals and bargains with your offensive line. It's not a priority on this team, and it never has and never will be. It seems that way. Even this year, we're deaf mute on the moves for the offensive line. And you wonder, will you ever hit on an offensive lineman? Even a broke clock is right twice a day. And you would think at some point making all of these, and they spend the draft capital on the offensive lineman. Not high draft capital, but they do draft offensive linemen, and they have not hit on one yet, if you ask me.
I was going to push back on that part of it because they absolutely have used the draft capital on offensive line. I think I can't remember the exact time frame, they've used more draft capital on offensive linemen than any team in the NFL.
Yes.
So you have first rounder in Cross, third rounder in Lucas, third rounder in Hayes, fifth rounder in Oluwatimi, sixth rounder in Laumea. Ethan Posick was a second rounder. Damian Lewis was a second or third rounder.
Fetty was a first rounder.
Yeah, so it's James Carpenter back in the day. They have used draft picks up there. They haven't spent second contracts on guys. And they're going to have to do that, just like the Mariners paying their pitching staff. They're going to have to do that with Charles Cross and Abe Lucas coming up here in the near future too. They have spent resources on the offensive line. I think some area of the fan base think they've completely neglected. They've used draft picks on it. They haven't gotten enough out of the draft picks, and I think that's a fair criticism for sure. And if you're not getting it there, and it's not lining up for you to get the right guy in free agency to come in and backfill that spot, that's how you kind of end up where you are. How much the coaching play in it, that's part of the equation too. I guess we'll find out how that all kind of lands.
That's a good point.
There's definitely a hole somewhere in the system of evaluating offensive linemen. Like Curtis just said, he ran off all the draft picks, and I would say most of them are serviceable, serviceable, maybe slightly above average.
I'd say he's more than serviceable.
Slightly above average. And Damian Lewis was serviceable also, slightly above average maybe, and they just let him go. Mm-hmm. So even the ones that show that they can play at that level in this league, they don't go to their second contract. That is a priority problem. That's not prioritizing the protection of your football team. And if it's all about the trenches, that's what they say all the time. I can't tell, because the moves and the development and the capital that you spend is not working out. It's not paying off.
Well, yeah, I feel like we could talk about the Seahawks offensive line all day. We do have to run. Curtis, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yes, thank you.
Curtis Crabtree, you can find his work on fox13seattle.com. You can also see him on Washington Sports Wrap making guest appearances whenever we need him, because he's always available to us and able to help us out. That's weeknights at 7:30 p.m. on Fox 13. For Curtis, D-Jack, I'm Ethan McReynolds. See you next time on the Sidelines.
Let's go!
On the Sidelines is available wherever you get your podcast.